is interacting with us. Well, it's actually God has always been there to do exactly that. So in a sense, it's a model that is incorrect to think that God is interacting and is influenced by our interaction with God, etc., right? And so if you think that way, you end up no longer having a good excuse to interact with God, which is what church is all about. So the concern that we'll see is that if people believe in Locke's theory, and by the way, we could argue today that most of Northern Europe, and in fact quite a lot of the United States, what we think of as the enlightened folks, are believers in the idea that the universe is a physical thing that has been in motion. Whatever started it in motion, whether it was a big bang or whatever, it's there, and everything that happens because of cause and effect, deterministic type relationships. So in a sense, there's no such thing as free will. There's no such thing as a deus ex machina, a God in the machine that comes in and changes so that advance the hour so that you get extra light during the summer or something, and any of that stuff, right? So the threat that a lot of church leaders understood from this theory was that it was going to basically deny the need for religion and basically leave civilization without that kind of moral leadership that came from the church, right? And so even today, if we race forward to today and we think about all the kinds of problems that we're faced with today, a lot of those are in a sense predicted by those who were critical of Locke's theory. That if people start believing this, they won't believe in God anymore. And notice that's true in most of Northern Europe. And the churches are primarily there for tourists, even though they're state supported for the most part. So in a sense, this worry that this changing the model and saying that everything is all there and there's no point in having a God interfering or interacting or responding to our supplications, etc. Dangerous. So that's one issue. But now, Locke is also famous for being the first British empiricist. And that seems strange to me because Hobbes is clearly British and he's an empiricist. He's an Aristotelian. Aristotelian philosophy is essentially an empiricist point of view. How do we learn things? We have the tabula rasa, and experience writes on that brain. We have experiences. Remember, Hobbes argues, of course, there are motions of all different sorts going into our brain, and those motions keep on going. That causes dreams, it also causes thoughts, and it causes reactions. And my main reaction for everything is to make sure that I increase my happiness and decrease my sadness or my pain, right? So decrease pain, increase happiness, right? Is what our machines are basically geared to do. So there's no free will. There's no free agency in that. What Hobbes and Locke will continue to say is that the free agency is basically that the machine is able to do what it wants to do. When the machine can't do what it wants to do, well, then it's not free. But when it's free to do what it wants to do, and then it's free. Then it's free, right? But the idea that it's a magical, non-physically deterministic thing that happens, that's wrong. Everything is deterministic, etc. But the reason that Locke ends up becoming the so-called first British empiricist is because the problem of empiricism starts with him, and that's this primary and secondary qualities issue. So what Locke realizes is if Hobbes is right, and all of our experiences are caused by physical movements that enter into our brain, and then our brain is going to respond to those. What we think we know, what we are experiencing, is not the thing in itself. Remember that phrase, the thing in itself. You'll see it in lots of different versions as we go from now on. This is basically a problem. It's accepted, and still today accepted by many folks in our Locke-like, John Locke, common sense. If you think of it this way, when we see something, what we're experiencing is the impact the object has on our senses. And so what we're thinking about when we think about the thing or experience the thing, and this is why when you're in philosophy class you start talking about tables and chairs and stuff, because you need something immediately close to say this is an object, this is an object, and it looks to me like it has a certain shape and its hardness and all that sort of thing. Actually, I'm not seeing the thing in itself, according to John Locke, because the primary qualities that belong to the thing itself are what cause my senses to react the way they do. So what I'm actually seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, etc., is the way that my body, my senses, react to the objects that they experience. So in my mind, what I have of objects is caused only partially by the object and partially by my senses. Now this is actually pretty easy for us when we think, when a snake sees something. This is kind of strange, because they have mock-ups where they say this is what a snake or a rabbit sees, and they have like a reddish, thing. It just shows the heat, right? Because we know that snakes don't have eyes and perceive things the way humans do. Eagles apparently see things much clearer from much farther away than we do, etc. Plus, we know even different individuals. Some individuals have synesthesia. Some individuals have color blindness. Some individuals have other problems with their eyes, etc. So you need glasses. You need surgeries. If you want to see correctly. And yet, what we're talking about when we're saying we see correctly is we're seeing it in a particular human way, which is different than snakes, different than eagles, different than plants. Plants see, interesting question, right? What would you mean by that? But what we also know is that our eyesight is limited to a particular range of color, wavelength, etc. We don't see the infrared, we don't see the ultraviolet. If you're a parakeet, you see a lot of colors that humans don't see. And it turns out that birds apparently have lots of ultraviolet, I think, in their plumage, which communicates certain things to them, and we can't even see it. We think the birds are pretty, but we're not seeing half of the colors that the birds are seeing, right? Not only that, we're also focused on a particular size of things in the universe. Theoretically, the largest idea of how big the universe is and the smallest things that are in it put human beings roughly right in the middle of that scale of things. If it was 4 meters or close to 4 meters, is roughly the very middle of the largeness of the universe and the smallness of things. So that seems suspicious, that we're exactly in the middle of it. That's part of the anthropomorphic principle that man is the center of the universe, in a manner of speaking, right? So what we can see with our eyes is primarily of a size that's practical for us to be concerned about. If I'm trying to look at the germs that might be on the kitchen counter, I would actually need a microscope in order to see them, or something that would extend the limit of my human ability in order to see what's actually there. When I was a kid, I remember seeing one of the early Johnny White. I forget his name now, but the guy who played Tarzan in the TV shows, Johnny Weissmuller, I think his name was. He was a swimmer. That was the main reason he got hired to do the role. But in any case, at one point, the British tell him that there's bugs in his water, and he says, "No bugs, see it clear." He didn't speak English very well because he was raised by apes, right? In any case, there's problems with that, but let's just skip it. Edgar Rice Burroughs, he was kind of a version of Harry Potter, but in any case, they come over and they show him a drop of water in a microscope, and he sees all these little things running around, and so he throws the water away because there's bugs in it. Ha ha, In other words, we see at a certain range of things which we apparently, and our explanation for this is the theory of evolution, which is a story. So stories are not either true or false. They're an interpretation. We have facts, but you interpret those facts in the light of a story, a narrative. And so evolution, there's actually many different stories of evolution. In fact, if I get the chance here, I should show you. It's a small book by Stephen Jay Gould. I think it's about 1,000 pages. Whenever I say small, I'm kidding, of course, right? And if you get the chance, have a look at this, and you'll discover that it's the history, really, of all of the different evolutionary theories that were out there. It's really good, and it takes us all the way up until Stephen Jay Gould basically died in the 60s, so that's a shame. Everybody's sorry that he's gone, because he was a really good speaker for that, very critical of certain things, and of course people are going to be critical of his critical comments about some of those things. One of my favorites, by the way, of that is the dialogue between those trying to think how to discuss this, actually. I'm not prepared to discuss that, so I'll skip that. But there's conflicts over it. But so when you're talking about evolution as a theory, notice that there's actually a whole bunch of evolutionary theories. There's not really one thing that's evolutionary theory. Even when we talk about Darwinian evolutionary theory, the main problem that Darwin had is he didn't have any explanation for the kinds of things he was hypothesizing. And so even that could have been a variety of possible theories, etc. But in any case, we don't see everything that's out there. We've evolved in some theoretical way to deal with life as we experience it, and not all the other possibilities that are out there. So we can't change our lenses to automatically see smaller and smaller or larger and larger. Yes, we can create devices, and that might be, man the tool maker actually is one of the neatest things. When we create tools like the telescope that we've got out in space that is enabled to see things, in a much bigger picture than we could possibly have imagined And of course, we've got electron microscopes. Do we have anything even better than that now? I haven't kept up with the science in that respect, but you can see really, really small things, etc. And so that demonstrates that what we see as human beings is a very limited portion of what's really out there. And that just goes to show that we're not seeing things as they are in themselves, the thing in itself. We're instead seeing things as they seem to us. So the way we see things, the way they seem to us, for Locke, are secondary qualities. And the primary qualities are those things that exist in the corpuscles with the atoms themselves, right? And we don't actually see that. We don't actually see this as it is in itself. It's only available to me in the way that a human being perceives it. And since that's the case, up comes this problem. This is the problem of empiricism, and that is we can't actually know the way things really are. We can only perceive things as they seem to be to human beings. And this will become even more problematic when we discover that there are roughly 7,000 different languages, and the way people perceive the world is dependent also on the operating system their computer, their necktop is working in, which would be the language, perhaps, that you speak. And so some languages enable us to perceive other things, that we don't. Others perceive things differently than we do, and so on, right? One of my favorites, and we've talked about this already, haven't we? On at least several different occasions. I showed you Lara Bodisky, who talks about it. Maybe it's